Hey guys, this is the second episode of our JRB podcast. I'm Ryan Levine, joined with Bohdan Temnyk and Jeff Jones.
What's
And
up?
Yo.
and today we are going to be discussing the topic of world premieres in the TCG. So for those of you who don't know what that is, going to give a very brief explanation of it before we step into it. Um, the sets that we open here in the TCG are slightly different than the sets that the OCG, the Asian markets get. So the core sets in Japan are 80 cards, and then through a mixture of imports of previously exclusive Japanese cards and new to the game completely world premiere cards, our sets are 100 cards. That count has varied a little bit throughout the years, which we'll go over briefly as we go through it. But for the most part, that's pretty consistent. Up until very recently, it was always 10 imports and 10 new cards, but that number has varied, and when it's relevant, I will, we will mention it. So first, I do want to talk about the newest world premiere cards, being the fish support in Darkwing Blast and Power of the Elements, and then the two new cards, the probably more competitively relevant cards, being Spellbound and the Daruma Karma Cannon, which I know
I think
that
that's not the speculation.
yeah. And I know that Jeff, did you want to talk a little bit about the Goatee cards or the fish cards before we get into the more competitive ones?
Uh, yeah, sure. So, for those of you who don't know, I feel like we're gonna say that a lot. For those of you who don't know,
Well,
I'm gonna
thankfully, I
explain
don't
this.
know what any of those cards do.
The the Goatee cards are a world premiere deck, so that means Japan does not have access to these cards, and it is based around fish monsters that all look incredibly cool. I think the art on them is fantastic. That is the best thing about them, which is unfortunate, but uh, they are based around banishing themselves and synchro summoning. And the honestly, I don't think the cards are that awful. I just when you compare them to what already exists, that's when you see the discrepancy, the disparity between them and other cards. Um, I think the best thing they have going for them, which is something that when I look for in a deck that when I look for something in a deck, one of the first things I look for is how well can this deck do past turn one? And I think that's something that tier elements does very well because tier elements all shuffle themselves back into the deck. And something similar that another tier one deck did before that did that was Orcus, where you get to basically recur all your resources every turn. And the Goatee deck can do that, but instead of shuffling them back into the deck, they get banished and then return themselves to the hand or summon themselves back to the field. And every time you banish them, this happens. And I think that makes the Goatee deck have a lot going for it because you can really never run out of cards because things don't really interact with the banished like other cards do. You can interact with the graveyard, you can interact with the field, you can interact with the deck, but banished cards, there are very few cards that you can really do anything to those. So once they're banished, they're going to be coming back. You're going to be getting them back over and over again. And I think that with some more fish cards, I think that dude could really be something there. Um,
Right,
and
but what does it
something
what does it do now? Like, tell us like what it actually does now, because I've been struggling to like understand what this deck can achieve with the cards that it has now. Knowing full well, like, there's a lot of really cool fish support, but none of
Mhm.
it really works with these cards, right? That's like the biggest issue. I see people try and play like the level 7, the coelacanth, right? Like the big guy. There was like a deck that would do like that end board, but it needed Fibrax. So now I assume like that's just completely thrown out of the window in some way. And then there was like, all of the other really cool like fish cards don't really function with it either, but they're more like control-y, not really combo based. I feel like this deck is trying to be combo, trying to be control, but like I don't know what it's meant to do. Like, what do you think it's meant to do right now, currently, and what do you think it should look to do in the future?
So while I haven't really played with the deck, I've just kind of looked at all of the cards. I think there are some fish cards that go very well with it, and that would be when trying to think of them on the spot. I'm going to be awful, but it's the
The Generation
Lifeless
Force
Leafage.
ones, right? The ones from Generation Force that all like banish fish and sea serpents and whatever, like those types of cards.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Duel.
like they literally don't work with that deck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like
I had no
I'm
idea.
pretty
Okay.
sure every time I've seen a deck list like with them, they just don't function.
You mean oh fish that doesn't work?
Allegedly.
Okay.
So it's the Lifeless Leaffish, which is like a more
I
recent
think that
card.
card is really cool.
That was from
That
Rise of the
card-
Duelist, right?
That
I
card,
think.
yes,
Yeah.
it is an amazing fish card. When it's summoned in any way, you can send a fish monster from your deck to the graveyard, and you can banish it from your graveyard to target 3 fish monsters in your grave, shuffle them into the deck, and draw 1 card. So, like I said earlier, this deck has amazing recursion. All your cards will continuously be put back into your deck or banished, so you can keep using them. And there are with Lifeless Leaffish, you can send some of the Goatee cards to the graveyard, which you can then banish them for the effects, and will then let you special summon them back to the field or add them back to your hand. On top of that, there is the also it's one of the new shark cards that came out. That's pretty
From
good.
Legendary Duelist.
Is it that from Legendary Duelist
I know
Abyss?
Abyss Shark is pretty good.
Abyss Shark.
but I'm
Yeah,
not
Yeah.
sure if that's the one you're talking
Abyss
about.
Shark. That's definitely the one. So
Okay.
with Abyss Shark is a level 5, and if this card is used for an Xyz summon of a number monster, it can be treated as level 3 or 4. If all monsters you control are water, minimum 1, you can summon this card from your hand, and if you do, add a level 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, or 5 fish monster from your deck to your hand, and then you can only summon water monsters for the rest of the turn, and you double the first damage inflicted to your opponent by a number monster, which is not really that relevant. But on top of that card being able to special summon your fish or search your deck for fish monsters, you can get some tuners and get some synchro summons going. Um, One of the also really powerful cards is it's from it's that Kraken card that turns everything to water.
That's also from Legendary
Mhm.
Duelist, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
you mean the
Oh,
Six Seas, right?
Stealth Kraken.
Stealth Kraken,
Stealth
yeah,
Kraken, yeah.
that card too. I think that card is also incredibly good. Turning everything on the field to water can screw up some strategies, and also has a quick effect to destroy
Well,
opponents'
that's
monsters.
just like the Marine Cess deck was doing that with like Gozen for like a minute, right? That was like the strategy of maybe
Right.
some of the dueling book period. I don't think it really saw any success in tournament, but
Yeah.
it was still there. It was like a very annoying strat.
So with the Goatee cards, what you're aiming to do is you quick synchro summon on your opponent's turn, and each of them have effects that will do things like banish your opponent's card. So one of their level 8 monsters says that you can uh, target 1 fish monster you control. If this card's synchro summoned, you can target a fish monster you control and a card your opponent controls, banish them. If this card is banished, you can banish 1 fish monster from your graveyard, special summon this card. So when you synchro summon this card on your opponent's turn, you can banish itself and an opponent's card. Then you banish a fish from graveyard to summon it back to the field. So like I said, you get a lot of recursion. You have some removal. Their boss monster, Goatee of the Deep Beyond, is kind of like a Zero Boros synchro monster, which is a level 10. And when it's synchro summoned during your opponent's turn, you can banish all cards on the field. And then during the next standby phase, after he's banished from the monster zone, you can special summon him back, and he gains 500 attack for every banished monster. So if you're able to summon this card on your opponent's turn and wipe their field, he'll come back on your next turn, probably around 4,000 attack, and then you'll be able to make a second one, which will also be around 4,000 attack and kill your opponent. As far as the newest support, let me bring that up on my computer. Darkwing Blast.
The one that I was most interested in, if I'm remembering it correctly, is there's one that just, which I don't believe there's ever been a card to have like this text on it or anything even similar. Is like a lot of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh have effects that are like, if this is in the graveyard, you can banish it, or like if this is in the graveyard, you can do something, and then it like has an effect. This one has an effect like if it is banished, it has like an ignition effect or like a quick effect to like summon itself back. So it just activates in the banished if it's already in the banished, and I can't think of many cards that have
Yes,
effects
and
like that.
And that's definitely one of the best cards, and that's Zep Ruby of the Goatee. And it says you can banish this card from your hand to target a fish monster in graveyard, and you banish it. And during your opponent's turn, if this card is banished, uh, you can special summon it. So, and if this card is special summoned, you can immediately after this effect resolve synchro summon one fish monster using this card you control. Um, so you are able to banish this card and then summon it during your opponent's turn to synchro summon, as well as banishing cards from graveyard. Um, Another one is they have a new level 4 monster, and something to keep in mind that since it's a level 4 water monster, you can make totally awesome with this card. So you
Bahamut
don't
Shark, yeah,
always
yeah.
have to, yeah,
Mhm.
with Bahamut Shark, you don't always have to go into your synchro monsters, which I think is also incredibly relevant because we all know how powerful totally awesome is, even though it doesn't have, it's not as easily accessible in certain decks anymore, but you can still do it. So this level 4 monster says if a fish monster is banished, you can special summon this card from your hand. And during the standby phase of the next turn after this card was banished, you can target one of your Goatee traps that is banished or in your graveyard and set it. Um, Goatee do have 3 or 4 trap cards. I think only 2 of them are good. And they have a field spell, of course, because every deck needs a field
Yeah.
spell, and their field spell is also pretty good. My favorite though is this level 6 new monster called Synopsis, Fate of the Goatee, and he is 2100 attack. Something else I wanted to point out, and if anyone else who's listening can let us know, is all of the Goatee monsters that aren't tuners have 0 defense. If anyone knows why, if there's like a lore reason or I don't know, but
Is there
I found that
some
very
like
strange.
support? Is there some obscure fish support that needs zero defense monsters that they're waiting
I
for somebody
don't.
to discover? Is there a fish
Uh,
rekindling for zero defense?
yeah, yeah. I don't.
Maybe
I don't
that
know.
is the last round of support. Something related to
Yes,
that.
yes. So this
Yeah.
this level 6 monster says during the main phase, quick effect, you can banish 2 fish monsters from your hand or graveyard and special summon this card from your hand. If this card is special summoned, you can target one face up card in the field, banish it whenever that card leaves the field. If this card is banished, you can banish one fish monster from your graveyard, add this card to your hand. So not only does this card have a quick effect to special summon itself from your hand, it'll also trigger your Goatee monsters. So during your opponent's turn, you can activate this effect, special summon, banishing 2 fish monsters from your graveyard, hopefully the tuner monsters, and then the tuners will come back, and then you can immediately synchro summon. Um, its second effect, which says you can target a face-up card in the field, banish it when it leaves the field, is kind of niche. But what's interesting is that not only can you target your opponent's cards, you can target your own cards. So you can target itself, and then when you synchro with it, it gets banished, and then you can banish a fish monster from your graveyard to add it back to your hand, and then you can special summon it from your hand again later. So, like I said, you keep getting this card back and triggering all of your fish monster effects, and can keep synchro summoning. Um, Over and over until you can win. I think this is probably this and the Zep Ruby of the Goatee are the 2 best cards they got. Um, the secret rare they got is Gugolem, Spear of the Goatee, which is their second level 8 synchro monster, and it isn't as good as the other one, which is a common, which I'm surprised
That
of.
is, yeah, that is really bizarre. Like
But it
the
does have a unique effect to be able to deal with monsters which normally cannot be dealt with. So it's a generic level. It takes a fish tuner and then non-tuners, and at the start of the damage step, if it battles an opponent's monster, you can banish that opponent's monster. So it gets rid of things that normally couldn't be like destroyed or targeted,
yeah,
right?
interesting. Yeah,
Mm.
it's sort of like Catastor, but it banishes instead of.
Yeah,
That's a
and then it
dated
says during your
reference.
yeah, during your opponent's standby phase, you can banish this card and summon all of its synchro materials back from the graveyard. So that is like okay. So normally, what you would probably want to use this for is to like attack a monster you want to get banished, and then during your opponent's turn, summon back its materials and make the second level 8 monster, which says when it's summoned, you can banish a fish monster you control and a card your opponent
Yeah.
controls. Um, and then we have Goatee, a level 6 Goatee, which is I think also a pretty good card. A level 6 synchro, and his name is Aaron Post, Serpent of the Goatee, and he is generic. And if he's synchro summoned, you can banish a level 6 or lower fish monster from your deck, So that automatically will go and get you your tuners, which will summon themselves, as well as if you decide to banish the level 6 monster, you can also add that card back to your hand. And if it's sent to the graveyard as a synchro material, you can target a fish monster in your graveyard, banish it, and then add a fish monster with a equal to or lower level from your deck to your hand. So this is one of the climbing tools they can use to, again, when it's synchro summoned, you basically get to tutor a level 6 or lower fish from your deck, and then when you synchro with it, you get to also add another fish monster from your deck to your hand. Um, so like I keep reiterating, they have a lot of ways to keep getting their cards back, and that is a very, very strong mechanic to have in a deck.
Yeah.
As for the new trap cards, I don't really like this one, but it's a normal trap called Goatee Cosmos. The art does look cool though. And it says apply these effects in sequence based on the number of banished fish monsters. So this is banished fish monsters anywhere. And something I do hate about cards like this is that if Goatee was ever good, the mirror match becomes really like toxic, right?
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Mhm.
That's like
so
a Gotham's emergency call type thing where someone's X Sabers
right.
from either graveyard. Another dated reference.
So for
Mhm.
one fish monster, your fish monsters cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. If you have 4 or more, the activation of fish monsters effects activated on your field cannot be negated. And if you have 8 or more, you special summon a fish synchro monster from your extra deck, and it is treated as a synchro summon. I don't think I would play this card. However, I do like this next card, which is a continuous trap, which is what we like to see, called
Yeah.
Goatee Fury, and it says. Uh, you can target one fish monster you control and one monster your opponent controls. Banish both monsters until the next standby phase. So this is a once per turn effect. And if a fish monster is special summoned to your field while any card is banished, you can banish this card from your graveyard or face up spell and trap card zone. All fish monsters you control gain 100 attack for each currently banished card until the end of the turn. So not only is this a generic removal effect every turn, but you can also use it to game shot your opponent because you'll gain all your fish monsters will gain like 700 attack or something
Yeah.
ridiculous like that. Um, so yeah, those are the Goatee cards. It went on a little longer than I
Yeah,
thought,
that's
but
fine.
I got a little more excited about them as I talked about
Yeah,
them.
I guess not to spend too much more time on them, but just kind of like as like a closing thought on them. I think even if they're not super competitive in like the current format, we talked last week about Hard the Underdog, right? And maybe you know if that format really picks up, then like that's where cards like this can really shine. And I think it would be interesting if the alternative formats like that get popular enough that we can see like a metagame develop around those like alternative formats, and then maybe something like Goatee, then people like a lot of what makes it so these newer or like decks aren't aren't played as much is because when they're not perceived to be strong, less people are playing them, and then they don't get optimized, right? So even if they
Mhm.
had potential, there aren't enough people kind of like grinding away at them to figure out what they can do. And I feel like maybe some alternative formats to have people explore these lesser played decks could, in theory, lead to them being more optimized and even potentially kind of creep their way into actual constructed play. But that's a topic for another time, I think. And I
Is
kind of
And
want
there
Goatee
to.
there
a
is one
rivalry of the
other
Warlords deck?
I don't
Rivalry of
know.
Warlords.
I don't know. That's a side event
I
where
feel
they
like
give
that
you
would be a
pre-made
deck that
decks.
they would just like have
Oh
chilling
yes.
there, and
Yeah.
Jerome's just like, hell yeah, let's go.
So there is one other thing I want to mention, and that's with when our last TCG or World Tour archetype was the B Troopers, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Japan just recently got the Beat Troopers, and what Japan decided to do is in their next set, following the release of Beat Troopers, is release a bunch of generic insect type cards. And so I guarantee that when Japan gets these cards, we're going to see a lot more of generic or good fish support, which would help boost Goatee. And I think that Goatee is in a way better place than uh, the Beat Trooper deck
VTuber. Yeah.
was,
Isn't the
and is
OCG like deck just was it the moth stuff? Wasn't it centered towards stuff like that, or am I just thinking of something else?
the what?
Like the new stuff coming out in Japan, isn't that like actually just like related to the perfectly ultimate
No,
great
no,
moth
they
sort of thing, or
they
am I
got
thinking of
like a
something else?
big like insect that's like banish
Hmm.
3, and it's like also has like a Regeki
Yeah,
effect.
and
Like
like
it's
fuses and stuff like that, right? It's like the whole thing.
I don't know,
I'm pretty
but
sure.
But yeah, if they do support fish more, that could definitely put them in a better spot. So I do kind of want to move on to the other like more generic
Yes.
cards, more like competitive cards potentially. So again, I don't want to harp on this one too much. So Spellbound has been getting a lot of hype. It's a quick play spell that reads: all face-up monsters your opponent currently controls cannot be tributed, used as material for a fusion, synchro, exceeds, or link summon until the end of this turn. So a lot of people are comparing this to cards like Dimensional Barrier and No Material. And
I would like to say that they're incorrect.
I don't, yes, I agree with you. I don't think those comparisons are accurate. And I'm going to take just a moment to explain why. So I think you had a funny tweet when, well, so I tweeted something like
I stole it from you.
I tweeted something like Spellbound is mid. Like, I don't get it. And then somebody compared it to No Material. And then you said comparing this to No Material is like comparing Solemn Strike to Psyframe Gamma. And I don't, and that's not like, that's pretty accurate. I think it's like for this to be No Material, you have to go first, unlike No Material, which is only good going second because you have to have no cards. And if you're going first, I would argue almost any trap is just better. Like if your opponent summons two monsters and you go, I'm going to flip Spellbound so they cannot perform a tribute, fusion, synchro, exceeds, or link summon with these two monsters. I would argue, is torrentialing them not just better? Is solemn striking the monster they make not just better? Is
you could literally
like,
Book of Moon their guy.
yeah.
And it would just be the same or better or something.
Speaking of Book of Moon,
I think the biggest problem when it comes to a card like that, right, is when it becomes playable in the format. Then that means every deck will play it, and then that just means your turns will just like you'll just pass back, right? I can't even fathom in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! A deck where that card is playable solely because you have to like do stuff on your opponent's turn. I just think that there's just like nothing leads me to believe there will be a deck that is just going to like let your opponent do stuff that is so oppressive on your turn that you would play this card and have to play this card because we have Flunderies, right? And that's just a deck that like this card is pretty good against, but it's Flunderies.
Yeah,
like
because
there's just a bunch of other levels to it. Like at that point, your opponent has M-Pen and Barrier Statue on the field. Like, what are you doing? Are you pairing Spellbound with something else?
Because
like,
the advantage of this is that it's a quick play spell, so it can be also used allegedly, when you go second. But at the same, but I agree with you. What is your opponent doing when you're going second? That like what are they doing that's so oppressive you would pick this? Right? Like, in my opinion, because that was something people were saying, is this is good against Flunderies going second. I think a better card against Flunderies going second is actually Mistaken Arrest. I cited it, and Calvin cited it for YCS Hartford in Sword Soul. And not only was it good going second against Flunder, it's good going first against Flunder, and it's good going first against a bunch of other decks. You can just go first and set it, and it's just really good. Because when you summon a guy and they go, okay, map summon Rubina, you Mistaken Arrest, and now they can't add anything. And it's the same thing as making it, like, they can't add anything for the whole turn. It's the same thing as making it that they can't tribute. Like, so I think if you're putting Spellbound in going second against Flunder, like, that's incredibly narrow. And then you're putting Spellbound in going first against a different deck, it's like, that's incredibly narrow. I understand there is value in that this card has overlapping roles, sort of. But I think it's very few and far between those overlapping roles will be relevant. I don't think it's impossible this card will eventually have its day. I actually liken this card more to something like Magical Spring, in that Magical Spring is not a card that you look at. For those of you who don't know, Magical Spring is a card that was very popular against Pendulum back when, a couple years ago, where Magical Spring says, count your opponent's face-up spells, you draw that many cards, and then you discard cards equal to your face-up spells, generally one being the only, Magical Spring. And then your opponent's spells like can't be destroyed or negated for the rest of the turn or something like that. Some irrelevant like restriction that doesn't really matter. Or the only time it mattered, it was actually a hindrance to them, or they were trying to destroy their own pendulum scales, and then you would make it so their scales can't be destroyed, and you draw a bunch of cards, and then you just evenly match them and they lose. So that was very popular in Spiral as a side card for Pendulum. And I know Spellbound and Magical Spring aren't functionally similar in their effects, but I think they're functionally similar in the roles they serve. They're incredibly niche, but when they hit their niche, I think they have the potential to be very strong. In a meta of Goatee, when your opponent is synchroing on both players' turns, sure, maybe Spellbound is something that you want, right? But I don't see it being the like I don't know if you've seen the pre-sales. This card's pre-selling for like $70, and I'm just like, what is happening? Like, what is like?
To be fair, people also thought stuff like Warning Point was like,
I
you know what
guess,
I mean?
yeah,
It's like good.
sure,
It's like,
sure,
yeah, I guess,
yeah,
man.
but
This,
I
this is
just
like
don't
this is
see it.
literally the equivalent of like Sales Ban, Warning Point, like cards that are just almost there.
Yeah,
Literally
Also,
almost
I
there. They
something
don't
I
need to be
want to
more
point out
aggressive.
is that this card tricked me at first too, and I think that's something that will happen to a lot of
Oh,
people.
currently
Um,
controls. Yes, we
and
can. Yeah.
yeah, when I first read this card, I was like, "Holy shit, this card is broken!" And then Max told me Ryan said the card isn't very good. And I was like, "What is Ryan out of his mind?" And then I'm like, and I even said, "Did I not read it right?" And Ryan said, It's all monsters you currently control." And I said, "Okay, I did not read this card correctly. I just thought it was
Mhm.
like dimensional barrier, and you couldn't use any of your monsters for the turn." Um,
I mean, that would
and
just not be okay. Like
yeah,
that
no,
would
no,
that would
and that
actually like
card would be absolute. I was like, cause I even said to Max, like, "What are they thinking? Why would they make this card?" I was actively mad for about 10 minutes until Ryan calmed me down by telling me
mhm.
the truth. Um,
Telling yes.
but I also
Sure.
just think
What if I
that
Curious Griffin to end my opponent's turn?
yes,
Wait a minute,
when
that's what I do anyway. Go on.
when you look at cards and you see like the text like cannot. Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
that is like a very polarizing term in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like you cannot be responded to, you cannot do this. So I think that also is like when people see this like cannot be. They focus more on the cannot be used, tributed, whatever, and not on the beforehand, and don't realize that like the monsters on the field right then can be unless you're interrupting with the rest of the cards. Your opponent can just summon more monsters after that and use those cards as materials, right?
Yeah.
Ryan raised a very good point when we were first talking about this card, where he said if this card just had like the little restriction that could of your opponent cannot respond to this card, I think it would have been a lot better. And the reason being that I think that you brought up was you could actually use this like, oh, going first, like it can maybe let your opponent commit a bunch of monsters to the field, you flip it, and then like whatever, right? Because like you're versing Element or something, it's like, oh yeah, you know, like they can make kick close, but when they have a bunch of dudes on board, like what are they doing? Like they're not
Hmm.
making throwaway links to play around Spellbound. And you made the argument of, oh, well, if you couldn't respond to this card, it would beat Eradicate Epidemic Virus, because the card also says, like,
Yes. Yeah, because you
monsters can't
can't
be triggered.
tribute it
And
at all. Yeah.
that
And
just makes, like, a world of sense, right? Like,
yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Like, that's genius. Like, it's literally all it needed. And, like, I think it would have gone from, like, well, not, obviously not, like, super duper playable, but just, like, that one little line of text would have given it, like, an extra application. Um, and now it's just like, oh, you'll activate this going second, and then what? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, it just there's no like appeal to it. Like super poly can be chained to it. You know, like just all of like the weird levels that sort of go with it.
Yeah.
It's just
I remember saying that, and I remember we agreed that it had application. And when you started saying it, I couldn't remember what card I brought up as being a
mhm,
counterpoint to. And I think it's like I was like, yeah, I did say that, pulling out my collar. Like I don't remember
mhm.
why. But yeah, I remember saying, yeah, if they have Eradicator and you could just play this, and they weren't allowed to chain Eradicator, this would actually be like I
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah.
like 1% better. But it's like no, you just. But you're right, yeah. You just activate this, and they go like chain Eradicator, and you go yeah, or they like chain Super Poly, you're like yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Like,
like oh god.
what's the point? It's like, oh,
Also, something
okay.
that's
Yeah.
funny, something that's really funny is that also something that people have brought up is that like this doesn't, even though it's a quick play spell, this is not chainable to back row removal. If your opponent begins their turn with Lightning Storm,
Mm.
you can't chain this. I thought it said all face-up monsters
It
on the
did.
field at one point, and
So
I
sick.
thought you could chain this and not get sphere moded or kaiju'd, but it can't
I
even do
saw House
that.
of
It's
Champs.
only
I
your
saw House of
opponent's
Champs
monster.
say that. Yeah, no, literally, like I was like, oh, what if it beat Lava
I
Golems? Like
know.
Hero
I
Frost.
thought about that too. It's like it's a card
Wow.
that's like it's so close to having these applications that because okay,
No.
personally, I don't think if it had the changes that we were talking about, if it was the whole field, I think it would actually be a better card. As crazy as that sounds, And if it
Mhm.
were not be able to, I'm going to say, if it were not be able to be responded to by spells and traps, if your opponent could chain monsters, but your opponent couldn't chain spells and traps to it, I think that would be, I think
Mhm.
that would also fit the lore of like Spellbound, right? Like, I think that would be
Sure,
cool.
sure, sure.
I don't think it would be a crazy oppressive card, even with the improvements that we said. I think it would just be maybe okay,
Better.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
like it
So
would not be like borderline unplayable.
yeah,
I think it's probably the big
yeah,
one. But yeah, dude, like I think that the whole thing of just like, oh, this is when people compare it to D barrier, and it's like, well, no, I can
yeah.
flip D
That's not
barrier
even
against a deck
remotely.
that will
D
beat
barrier
you.
also negates
Yeah, you're like,
effects of
Yeah,
already
yeah,
face
yeah.
up cards.
but it's just like, imagine like you set Spellbound and you're just like, haha, and then they cosmic it, like cosmic evenly. It's just like a whole wealth of
That's what I'm
cards.
saying. Yeah.
Obviously, not evenly, but like that's just like crazy to me that anyone could compare it to a card like D barrier, where D barrier literally just says your opponent can't. Like you cannot
Yeah.
do this thing
Yeah.
for a turn, and this card says you cannot do this thing for a turn with a whole guidebook of conditions going alongside it, which is basically just like saying that it has to be cards currently on the field. I feel like you got to roll your dice, you got to win the die roll, then you got to
Yeah.
roll your dice again, you got to draw your Spellbound, then you got to roll your dice again, hope it resolves. Like
Because
yeah, right,
so the last thing I want to say about Spellbound, and then I would like to move on. We've been on this for a while, I guess, but I think the way people evaluate this card has exclusively been in a best case scenario, which is like your opponent summons 4 monsters and you spellbound all of them. And I'm just sitting here like, what is that? Like, so
Yeah.
how you and I feel like I don't even know how to phrase this. I feel like when you're playing, when you've been playing for as long as we have, I guess, right? And you have as much experience as we do, and you think about how decks have historically functioned, decks don't go wide before they start like conglomerating their cards, if that makes sense. So like if your opponent wants to link climb, they don't put 4 little monsters on the field before they start link climbing. They will
I think the
generally
only
put
thing that's ever come close to doing that is anything with like dangers in it.
sure,
That could get
yes.
pretty
Mhm.
close to that. But that's
Yes.
it.
Yes. Generally speaking,
People kept bringing that up as well. It's just like, yeah, against like the danger to element deck, they'll summon some dangers and they're gonna make curious. It's like, no, a bunch of other things will happen before that
yeah,
can
it's
even
like
be
your
conceived.
your
But
opponent
also,
will be making
your
stuff
opponent has gone
first.
first.
Yeah.
Yes, literally, your opponent has gone first and set a card. Like, what happens if like they set summon limit?
Instead
the
of
same thing.
spellbound, yeah, like anti-spell, like anything.
Literally,
Yeah.
I am more scared of my opponent setting summon limit against me than spellbound. And if someone says
Mhm.
they can have cosmic for summon limit, oh, I can have cosmic for your
For
spellbound.
spellbound, it's the same thing. It's the
thing.
same thing, yeah. But it's like
Yeah.
it's like generally speaking, like just from like a strategic standpoint of just like because of how traps function. Because of like bottom, like torrential exists, like strike exists, like all these cards. You're not putting 4 monsters on the field before you start making like your bigger guys. You're putting 2 monsters on the field. Any response? No. I'll turn them into a link 2. I'll put 1 more guy on the field. Any response? No. I'll turn them into a link 3. Okay. Put 1 more guy on the field. You know what I mean? It's like Curious is a very, very specific case of you have to use 3 different cards like that are not like already combined. But it's like if Spellbound becomes a card in the meta, it's incredibly easy to adjust your play pattern, even if your deck was putting 4 different guys and then going into Saryuja or whatever. If Saryuja's like a popular card, it's not right now, but if it was or whatever, like then you just adjust your play pattern and you stop going for wide plays like that, and then Spellbound is unplayable again. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's just a card. So again, I don't think this card is unplayable. I just think it is very overvalued by people applying it to unrealistic, nearly fictitious situations.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of other cards are better in nearly all of the roles that Spellbound can fill.
A lot of other cards that people are also just not playing.
That are not
currently.
play-
You want,
yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
also like even cards that people are playing. You want to flip a card to make your opponent not play. Use one of the 100 floodgates everyone can use.
Yeah. And then just
So-
yeah. And like again, the application Spellbound has is that it can fill multiple roles at once, technically. In that it can, it is a quick play spell. It's a very versatile spell. And again, I will compare it more to Magical Spring than to anything else in that when it has its day, I'm sure it will be very impactful. But this is right now in like a tier element Ishizu, soon to be Ishizu, like bestial in an incredibly graveyard-based metagame that we have right now, with Sprite Elf, all the bestials coming out, the tier element shuffling back from grave. Spellbound is not gonna be great
we're
right
literally
now.
shifting into a hand trap tempo sort of base
Yes.
metagame of like summon skull DD crows featuring a bunch of fairies that will mill some cards
Yeah.
and make fusions that you can make, under Spellbound. Weird. Yeah, never got that one.
Yeah.
But,
we really got to get to these other cards.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so Destructive Daruma Karma Cannon is the other, I think, like more competitively viable premier card. It says it's a normal trap, change as many monsters on the field as possible to face down defense position. Then, if either player controls a face up monster or monsters, they must send all face up monsters they control to the graveyard. So the interesting points about this: link monsters cannot go face down, so all link monsters will be sent to the graveyard, and it makes a player perform the action, not the trap card itself. So cards that are unaffected by card effects will be sent to the graveyard because they will not be flipped face down by the first part of this. So again, this card is not staple 3 of game ending by any means, but it absolutely has its applications and niches, and I think it's more applicable than Spellbound to certain things. One thing I don't like about this card actually is against non-link decks, it is terrible going second, because when you flip all their guys to defense mode, they can just flip them back up because they were summoned the previous turn and they can still change their battle position, but going first, I think this is just better than Spellbound going first in nearly every scenario.
Absolutely.
I think this card is going to fill a similar role to like Ice Dragon's Prison.
Sure. Yes. I think that's a very applicable card, or a very
obviously we've seen a lot of the sort of metagame sort of trend more towards, we'll have like the bigger deck, and then we'll have a deck that is maybe dependent on like its normal summon or something, and then a lot of these normal summon dependent decks will maybe put up a link at some point in the middle of their combo, and this card functions like Book of Moon, Torrential Tribute, you know what I mean, Forbidden Apocrypha, like all of those sort of cards just like kind of rolled into one, but not really. And I like that it does have, like the multiple application behind it. I think it's just a very, very well-rounded trap card. I don't necessarily know if it'll be impactful yet, but it's definitely a card that you're meant to look at, right? Like I feel like all of those trap cards will have their day at some point because they're not bad cards. It's just Yu-Gi-Oh! Is past the point of like, if you're putting tech trap cards in your deck, I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that like maybe its nicest point, right? Yeah. And then when it's just trap decks, it really doesn't matter because those cards can be anything, and it could be Torrential Tribute and probably function the same half the time, right? That's like
I think it's a nice tech option. So in a format where there are trap-based decks, maybe like Eldritch. Something cool about Eldritch also with this card is changing golden lands to defense mode actually puts them back in your spell and trap card zone. You can flip them again as traps. Very interesting mechanic about trap monsters and being flipped face down. So I think that card has some cool application that you get to reuse your golden lands. And then 2, if there's a meta game where you're playing Eldritch or whatever, something like that, and then in the format there are some pretty hard to clear cards, this is what would help you do that. I think this is an answer to Access Code made with an IP Masquerena, right? Like that's a card that these decks have.
Very
taking like
right?
a rival Ignister.
Yes.
Without like you didn't get to skill drain early, and now you just have like a card that's just saying, look, I don't want to say in engine, but you know what I mean. Like it has this application going first and second in that respect. I think those sort of cards are always really, really good because you'll notice a lot of the time when it comes to deck building for decks like decks like that against some of the fields where it's like, oh, they put up a bunch of negates, stuff like that. I know from like our testing experience, it does come to what cards can we pair together. And when you like come down to it, you have cards like Solemn Strike, which is suck against Terror Element or something, but they're really good when people are ending on like Elf Toad. And I think this card is well rounded enough to sort of fit like multiple roles where you would replace maybe a card like Solemn Strike depending on the format, and it would just be like this card is this and this against this matchup. And it's functioning, like another card I can pair with a Floodgate or something like that. I think that's really, really good. Yeah. And obviously, like, it has the application of like Trap Trick and all the other cards that function with normal trap cards. So like the Labyrinth deck as well, right? Like that's like a big thing with normal trap cards too. if I'm not mistaken. But
So
I could be. I
this
haven't read
doesn't function with Labyrinth as well as other traps because it'll flip. Well, two reasons. One, it'll flip all your Labyrinths face down. It'll flip all your Labyrinths face down, and then two, it doesn't count as a normal trap removing the card. Not that it would matter because your Labyrinths would never be face up to see the monster leaving the field anyway to trigger their extra effects, but it wouldn't trigger them
doesn't
anyway.
really make a difference, but
Yeah.
like.
But it's still
like
like a
I've
good
seen
card.
that deck play stuff like Backjack, and like it has some functionality with like tutoring traps, right? Like there's some.
Yeah, I mean, if you,
application
you're right. If you hit this off of a Backjack, this is an incredibly impactful card to hit off of Backjack or something like that. It's better Spellbound. It's Spellbound that flips them all their guys face down, so they can't use their effects on your turn.
Yeah, basically, for the gist of it, trap good, quick play spell.
Yeah.
Pretty average.
Yeah. So something that we didn't talk about with this card, which I think is incredibly important, is that when you see traps nowadays, including cards like Ice Dragon's Prison, all those cards are once per turn. This card is not once per turn.
That's a big one. It sort of plays into the whole pairing, right? That's the big thing. Like when you look at like building a trap deck, you sort of just want to have like the steady flow of like, I will go first, and all my oppressive cards are going to be oppressive regardless. But when I go second, if my opponent's putting up negates or interactions, stuff like that, you do want to guarantee that maybe your more powerful traps will go through. So this card seems really good at facilitating that because it basically will force a negate, or just your opponent will flip cards down going, he'll be fine. And then they'll flip something like Gozen or Rivalry and stuff like that. And I think that's like a very funny application.
That's really
Having
strong.
This with something like Rivalry, right? Like you flip it. If they just let everything get set, they flip it one at a time. They flip the first one, you flip Gozen. They can't flip any of their cards. Like
that's really good. Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's really strong for sure. Yeah, this does pair very well with how trap decks have been.
Not being once per turn is just like, it's just another really powerful card. I think wasn't Ice Dragon's Prison activate, not use? It was.
Right?
I'm pretty sure trap cards are
almost always activate.
Always activate. Okay.
Almost always.
Almost always. There are some, but monster effects are almost always used, and monster effects are almost always used, and spell traps are almost always activate.
All right, I think that covers the Darkwing Blast ones, but I think we had a lot more to say about those than I thought, but I think that was good. So for the last bit, I do want to. This is kind of more fun, less competitively oriented. I want to do a quick run through of world premiere cards in the past, right? So and then kind of just we can talk a little bit about some of the more impactful ones and kind of how the game would just be different if we didn't have this. I'm sure a lot of these cards would have, maybe would have eventually just been released, just in something else in Japan, maybe, but we don't know.
We played the fun price game as well that we talked about. That would also be fun.
The what?
We'll render all the misinformation when people are like, yeah, back in my day, this card was $17,000.
Oh yeah, so something else about yeah, it's just like I think like stuff like the Progression series has made knowledge of older cards a bit more common. By that I mean like when we talk about old sets, maybe like a year or two ago, if I said, 2007's Force of the Breaker, most people would just have no idea even a single card from that set. But maybe because they've, seen stuff like the Progression series, some of these, like older, like sealed format videos that are getting more popular, you will have some context. And now we're going to provide even more context with how it was at the time, in that these were cards that Japan did not have access to. So even the limited knowledge that we had of the Japanese metagame back then would not have been applicable to any of these cards. And it was really on the, Western player base to figure out if these were good. So the very, very first the very first world premiere was like Tyler the Great Warrior, maybe, or like something like that. But I'm only going to cover core sets. So the very first world premiere card from a core set was from 2007's Strike of Neos, and it was Grandmaster of the Six Samurai.
Yep.
And that is
crazy.
That
was very impactful, right?
Oh, it was.
That card was insane at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
I just remember so also it's very funny to think about. That was the first sneak peek promo that I genuinely think was just impossible to get. Like, it existed, you could get it, but in North America, sneak peeks were a big thing. They weren't just like at your local store. And I know in Australia, we didn't have enough of the Grandmaster to go around. And that was just like a $20 promo for like a good amount of time from what I can remember. And then obviously, because like the next copy up was just a secret rare copy, and pulling a secret rare from one of those sets is just
impossible.
ridiculous.
Back then.
Right.
back then, like, because Strike of Neos was the first set that they brought secret rares back,
Mm.
right? Because they stopped doing secret rares for many, many, many years, and then with Strike of Neos, they brought back secret rares, and it was just a whole thing. And yeah, that was something. And then the next sneak peek, so that was the only TCG premiere in Strike of Neos,
Mhm.
and then
But
Force.
before then, they had all of the promos, right? Like it was just like from they had the hidden summoner card, right? Like that was the thing from Cyberdark Impact, and then before then you had like a bunch of other stuff like
Justy
Exchange of the
Break.
Spirits, Eye of the Harpy,
Justy
all of the
Break was
silly
the
stuff.
Cyberdark
Just
Impact
break,
one.
yeah, for
Yeah.
power. No, wasn't that for Power of the Duelist, or am I thinking of something
No,
else?
that
For
was
Power of the
Cyberdark
Duelist was
Impact.
hidden summoner, right?
Maybe, I don't know, but
Something was hidden summoner.
Force of the Breaker. The again.
Yeah.
So for the first two, for Strike of Neos and Force of the Breaker, there was one premiere card, and then after that there will be more. But Force of the Breaker's TCG
Yep.
premiere was
Volcanic
Volcanic
Rocket, right?
Rocket. That's
Again, that card's
crazy.
ridiculous.
That card is crazy. Like it's like, even if Volcanic wasn't like the best deck in 2007, but it's like that. I can't even imagine them printing that archetype without printing that card.
That card, if it was printed in 2006,
Would have been
right? Like
insane.
because
Yes.
2007 is when there was like this very slight like transition to more like ignorant Yu-Gi-Oh,
Yeah.
right? Like I think we had, because we had Stratos, we had all of these really powerful like D hero, like the turbo sort of decks,
Mhm.
and then obviously like the card quality just progressively got better and better. If it was out in 06, you had a 1900 attack monster. Even just ignoring like, oh hey, like Blaze Accelerated, Volcanic Shell, like you could just have some like weird Snipe Hunter tempo deck, and it'd probably just be better than every deck.
Yeah.
Like that existed at the time. Like I don't want to say that definitively, but you know that would have been crazy.
Sure.
1900 attack, and it's a free card. Go for it.
Yeah.
You know?
And then Volcanic Rocket has seen play since it was played in 2014 when they or 2015 when they printed the Volcanic, the good Blaze Accelerator top card. Yeah. So
and now obviously we're past the point of needing a card like Rocket.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Speed Duel. It's pretty good in Speed Duel, apparently.
Yeah, that's true.
It's actually like fine in Speed Duel. 2007 Tactical Evolution. This is the first set to include 10 world premieres, and that trend would continue for 10 years. Tactical Evolution was until Extreme Force.
Depressing, right?
Huh? What?
They were a lot more depressing for this one.
Yeah.
I feel like they were a lot
so from here on out, I do not have a list of every single one. I'm not going to read all 10 from every set ever printed. I have combed through these ahead of time, and I got like the impactful ones. Tactical Evolution's impactful world premiere was Ill Blood.
Yeah.
Which was a $100 card, and not good.
Yeah.
It was not good, and it was $100.
Yes.
In the grand scheme of things, just looking back at like that's the other one, like revisionist history. Like if we look back on like old Yu-Gi-Oh, and we look at a card like Ill Blood in a deck like Zombie that just had like Card of Safe Return and everything else, like it was just a really, really strong. Like young me just thought to myself, oh, Zombie is unplayable if I don't have Ill Blood.
Yeah.
And then looking back on it, it's like, no, that card probably shouldn't.
That card should not have been in the deck.
Yeah, that card was really bad. Like, yeah, but yes, like in hindsight, revisionist history, yeah. Gladiators.
And then
so I'm just gonna move on. I'm sorry. we have a lot to go through, and Ill Blood is not notable enough to spend more time on. I'm sorry. Gladiators Assault. Again, the only notable one I have here is Test Tiger, which is crazy. That was a world premiere. Test Tiger. That's something that okay. So also for some context, how Japan got our world premieres. If any of you remember the World Superstar Pack, where it was a bunch of new cards, Japan essentially gets a World Superstar equivalent called the Extra Pack every year. So at the end of every year, they get all of the world premieres in their own pack. So like they got Test Tiger pretty soon after we got it because Gladiators Assault was the last pack of the year. But they didn't get Grandmaster. So basically they had a pack that had Grandmaster, Volcanic Rocket, and Test Tiger and Ill Blood. So they got Test Tiger maybe like 2 months after we did. They got Grandmaster like 10 months after we did or something like that. So, some of these cards, it took them a while. But yeah, so Test Tiger. That was a crazy impactful card for Glad Bees. I can't really imagine trying to play it without that card.
No, absolutely. Yeah, Test Tiger was definitely meta defining
for a little bit.
I know that, yeah. But then they got Test Tiger.
But there is one thing I want to mention about Gladiators Assault World Premiere cards is that there are also 3 other very special World Premiere cards in here.
Oh, the art contest ones, right?
Yes, and we have Dragon Ice, Tongue Twister, and Screech, and these cards were 3 cards that were designed by fans for the Yu-Gi-Oh design card test that
Mhm.
Upper Deck did at the time and 4Kids. And so the artworks were submitted, and so kids drew these cards or kind of drew these cards and submitted them to uh, Yu-Gi-Oh would be Upper Deck at the time, and they got made into real cards. And Dragon Ice did see some play
Yes,
in
it
like
has,
in
yeah.
some
Yeah, I
in some
topped
decks.
nationals with Dragon Eyes.
All
Yeah.
right, calm down.
Also, you know what else? I'm pretty sure Royal Firestorm Guards was also like
It might
there was
have
a
been.
really good
Yes, it
art
was. It was
quality
in this one.
in that set.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Ralph
think
Firestorm
that
Guards
Firestorm
was in
Guards.
this. Yeah.
yeah, it definitely had like some of the cooler world premiere cards at the time, especially like before Yu-Gi-Oh got really like ignorant. I feel like cards like Screech and like Tongue Twister and stuff like that definitely didn't have time to shine because like they were just
Yeah.
on the cusp of like Teledad and Glad whatever. Yeah, but go on.
Yeah.
You're good.
So
Well, now we're going to Phantom Darkness.
well, I do want to take one step back actually. Now that you're talking about these kind of cards in Tactical Evolution, so I guess how a bunch of these were is they loved making the world premiere cards high rarity. Like they loved making them secret rares. I remember when I was a child, I was 12 years old. Because Tactical Evolution was I'd been playing maybe for like a year at this point, very casually. Like I was a literal child. I didn't know what was going on, and I pulled a Mormalith from Tactical Evolution. That was a secret rare I pulled, and it was a world premiere. And I remember Mormalith's effect. It's a secret rare, and its effect is like you contribute it to destroy like all monsters with defense lower than this card's attack. And I remember it cleared all your opponent's monarchs. And I was a little kid, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. And like in my tournament against like somebody that played like very competitively, he had like 2 rises, and I was like, normal Mormalith tribute, and like killed all of his rises, and I thought I was insane.
There was a Mormalith control deck with giant rats and creature swaps in that format, and it was unplayable and very funny.
I thought I was nice when I killed two rises with Mormalith. Anyways, yeah. So Phantom Darkness, I would say this is close to, if not the highest card quality of world premieres ever. In the history of world premieres, this is probably, and I don't have every single one, but these are the crazy ones. Allure of Darkness, Dark Grepher, Prime Material Dragon, Dark Lord Zerato, and Lone Fire Blossom. That's crazy. Japan didn't get these for a year, because this was the first set of the new year.
It's also crazy as well, because like at the time you had like these random, like these are cards that are seeing played now in like Edison and stuff like that. Like Prime Material Dragon as well. It's just like a really well designed card that they're just like, yeah, we'll just throw it in. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like unthinkable. Like at the time, it's like this one tribute protects itself, gains life, does a bunch of stuff like that. It's like, you know what I mean? Like Learn Fire as well.
I know Lone Fire, exactly. Yeah, Learn Fire and Dark. I mean, Allure of Darkness is great.
I'm more excited for Learn Fire than I am for Allure of Darkness. Like
Allure of Darkness was also the first world premiere to be like emergency hit. It was put to 2 in an emergency list back when the TCG and OCG still had the exact same lists. Allure of Darkness was deemed strong enough, they semi-limited it even before Japan even had it. So just a TCG exclusive hit to that card,
very powerful semi-limit.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yes. But yeah, so those cards are all crazy. I'm sure that most people know what all those are. I mean, Prime Material Dragon, like that one.
That card was like used in a very long time ago.
That card. Yeah, the other cards, a lot of them have been. Even Dark Lord Zerato, I'm pretty sure you played one in the Dark Lord deck in 2017, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But literally.
Light of Destruction. That's your next one.
Light of Destruction. The notable ones: Aaron and Arcus, 2 Lightsworn TCG exclusives that were both played.
Also some like other like kind of cool stuff if you really like dig deep, but not really. I think like Magical Exemplar is like again another like reasonably cool card. I think that's a really cool card
Magical
too.
Exemplar as well.
And then everything else is like pretty not noteworthy.
Which ended up being used for evil, as all spell counter things are.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Yes. Let us facilitate Tempest Magician and
Tempest Magician, spoiler alert, also TCG exclusive, also world premiere coming soon. But
all right, we have the Duelist Genesis.
Yeah, so this is the first set with Synchro Monsters, Duelist Genesis world premieres. Herald of the Orange Light. I did not know that was a world premiere. That one actually shocked me. Hand of the Six Samurai, relevant at the time maybe, but definitely not anymore. And then Charge of the Light Brigade.
Yeah, that was a card
Charge
that
of the Light
really.
Brigade was a world premiere. Japan didn't get it for like 6 more months.
Speaking of cards that were used only for evil, telekinetic charging cell.
Yeah, that sure.
Also a card that came out in this set.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then so I don't think Crossroads of Chaos, Tempest Magician, Treacherous Trap Hole, Gladiator Beast Rediari, and Overdrive Teleporter. All at secret rare in the set. Rediari not relevant anymore, obviously. Overdrive Teleporter actually exclusively relevant, like more recently, I guess. Like the earliest I ever saw anybody even think of using this card was in like Monarch, when you would just summon Ogre and something else, and you'd make a Beatrice and you'd like draw with Charge Warrior, but it can summon Zayamin. Overdrive Teleporter can summon Zayamin and the spell one.
This set also had, again, like the random interesting exclusives as well. Like Night End Sorcerer, I feel like is again like another cool card
which
that
we
did open up some stuff.
Night End Sorcerer, we eventually, like 10 years later, no, almost 12 years later, I believe in Blazing Vortex, we got a Synchro no, in Dawn of Majesty, we got a Synchro Monster requiring Night End Sorcerer as a named material. Incredibly fun. Which is funny.
We also have Cactus Spider as well, which is like another kind of cool, like Seed of Flame, like all the weird plant support that they made that, again, if it was printed a year or two earlier, would have just been, not amazing, really, but would have been a lot better than it was. So,
and then moving on to Crimson Crisis, probably one of the weaker sets. One of the weaker sets like ever printed.
Well, this was the first. Well, okay, I imagine there still would have been like upper deck input, but like to what extent, who knows?
Yeah.
But this is the first Konami set.
Yes, this was after Konami got the distribution back from upper deck. So I wrote Royal Swamp Eel and then in parentheses lol. That is what I have written down in my notes, because the card quality was so low.
That saw in someone won a YCS with a Coelacanth deck, right?
They won or they came second, right?
Second, yes. They got second YCS Charlotte.
Second, right? That was the whole
I believe it was second at YCS Charlotte. I believe
three
three fish decks topped that YCS, and one got second, one got top 8, and I do not remember what the third one got, but it doesn't matter. Not all of them played this card, but yeah.
Oh, Totem Dragon was also an exclusive, right?
Oh, what was? Oh, Totem Dragon. Yes, that was also in this set, which was like sort of an Edison maybe, I think, but like I don't know. I don't really know.
Disaster Dragons, like purists, like Yu-Gi-Oh from 2009 to 2014, like that. Not 14, but
And then the next set, Raging Battle, also very low card quality. The only two I have written down, I have Hardened Armed Dragon with, again, parentheses lol, and then the only other one I want to talk about was Immortal Ruler, not because it is good, but specifically, I guess Swallow's Nest, sure, but I Immortal Ruler, not because it's good, but because of how bad it is compared to modern cards, and it's so funny to track how card design happens. So for those of you who don't know, Immortal Ruler is a zombie world support card. So you're probably familiar with the card now, Necroworld Banshee, which you banish it from the field or graveyard to activate Zombie World from your deck. That is what that card does. Immortal Ruler has the text, cannot be special summoned. And then you may tribute this card to add Zombie World from your graveyard to your hand. Not even from your deck, from your graveyard. This was a secret rare in Raging Battle. Imagine you buy a box of Raging Battle in 2009 and pull Immortal Ruler.
The thing that I thought was interesting about this specific set was that I feel like it introduced the first almost like TCG archetype, right? Like kinda. Because you have the Merger, the Beast Striker, and the King of the Bees. Like, granted, it's just
you just synergy cards, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we never really saw stuff like that. You know, it would always just be like generic by itself into like, I guess there was some like, I don't know, the spirit cards sort of intertwined with the set anyway. But I thought that was interesting. You know, like that was something we'd never seen before of like, hey, like, here's 3 cards. You know, maybe you can make a deck with it. I don't know. You're hungry, ain't you?
So the next set, Ancient Prophecy, notable card was,
in my opinion.
Oh, I had Full Helm Knight. I don't know what the other one you're thinking about is.
Oh, Pseudospace.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, Pseudospace for sure. So Pseudospace and Full Helm Knight. Pseudospace not really at the time, but definitely since then has seen its day. But Full Helm Knight was played in.
Card God is also kind of interesting.
Card God, sure, yeah. but Full Helm Knight, we're going to talk more about that with the rest of the X Sabers later. 2009 again, Stardust Overdrive, Gateway of the Six.
Yes.
Granted, this was well before the Legendary Six Samurais came out, so this card was not good at the time. But in a little bit, it'll be relevant later. So then moving into 2010, Absolute Power Force, we had X Saber Emmer's Blade and Super Nimble Mega Hamster. Were my notable picks from this set. Which is
Super Noble. I love that card so much.
It's interesting to think about how unplayable X Saber must have been in Japan without these cards. By this point, Full Helm Knight had been printed in the extra pack, so Japan did have Full Helm Knight, but the next X Saber cards we're going to bring up, they did not have. So Emmer's Blade and Super Nimble they did not have.
Cactus Bouncer is another.
Sure, Cactus Bouncer. Yeah, that's a plant stun card. Yeah.
Same.
And then the next set, 2010, Shining Darkness. This is probably the first one since Phantom Darkness that you could argue has the strongest. So since Phantom Darkness, I don't think any of the other ones have really been close. Shining Darkness had X Saber Bogart Knight, X Saber Dark Soul, and Infernity Barrier. Just deck making card. Just these were the cards that defined the top tier decks at the time. And X Saber, I don't know how X Saber was even 1% playable in Japan without these cards. Infernity still had tools, but
Sniffus was also in this set, and Nimble Sunfish. Again,
Sniffus.
two pretty well-designed cards, in my opinion.
Yeah. But I think these are very, very strong. Obviously, these are not played anymore, but it's in terms of the power level at the time, these were incredibly strong cards. So 2010 D-Rev. I almost had nothing written down for this set, so the only one because I think maybe after Shining Darkness, they were all right, we got to dial it back a little bit. But D-Rev was also just an incredibly strong set. For those of you that weren't playing back then, D-Rev introduced some of literally the strongest cards and most timeless cards ever printed. It introduced Pot of Duality, Effect Veiler, Scrap Dragon, and Solemn Strike. Incredibly impactful cards. So the only world premiere card I have written down here is Scrap Archfiend, which is a 2700 vanilla level 7 synchro. Because maybe that would come up. But it was played sort of. It was played a little bit. I don't know.
Wait, which sorry?
Scrap Archfiend.
Yeah, it's just a normal monster with 2700 deck synchro monster.
Yeah, level 7, yeah. It was played in Infernity, maybe, in 2015. Infernoid, yeah. Infernoid.
Oh, is this a level 7 that could attack over Stardust Dragon?
Yeah, a level 7 attack over Stardust. Yeah, basically. So, all right, next set. 2010 Starstrike Blast, also potentially, very strong. Droll and Lockbird, crazy. Skullmeister, boo, and Psyblocker.
Yeah.
All very, and then I also have written here the guy on Mystic Mine with an angry emoji.
Gravekeeper's Recruiter.
Gravekeeper's Recruiter. I did not know that was. I missed that one. I did not know that was a premiere.
Also, Mischief of the Yokai. I'm not sure if that was an OCG card.
I don't remember.
No, Mischief of the Yokai was TCG.
Wait, what was Recruiter actually TCG? I missed that then. I missed that one.
Yeah.
I missed that. Okay, cool. Yeah, very impactful as well. And then Spellstone Sorcerer Karud, who is the guy on Mystic Mine. So, boo. Storm of Ragnarok, Chaos Hunter, and the best card ever printed, Maxi. So maybe this one beats Phantom Darkness.
Ryan, before he keeps going on.
Huh? What happened?
A whole episode on Maxi, Ryan.
I know. No, not now. It's fine. We're just gonna move on from that. We're gonna strike that one from the history books. 2011 Extreme Victory, also crazy. This might be, we just have getting hit after hit here. Full House, Reborn Tengu, and Tour Guide from the Underworld. Crazy. I mean, not Full House, but Reborn Tengu and Tour Guide were the format defining cards.
No, there's also another one which will be relevant somewhat soon.
And
that's Psybeast.
Oh yeah, Psybeast, yeah. That is
Dragon.
Huh? Dodger Dragon?
Dodger Dragon.
Yep.
I can't make this up. That card was playable in Disaster Dragon.
I know, yep. It was
Yeah.
like it was pretty popular. Generation
Oh.
Force, the first set with
Sorry,
Xyz monsters.
Hold up.
Wait, what?
Gladiator Beast Esadari. Was that an exclusive?
It was, yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Interesting.
So Generation Force, the first Xyz set, Adrius, Keeper of Armageddon, Orient Dragon, and Sea Lancer. Sea Lancer less impactful than the others in my opinion, but definitely still noteworthy enough. Sea Lancer Monarch was like
it definitely saw play at the
yes,
time.
yeah,
Like
it did.
Yeah. And then everyone wanted Pain Painted to be playable, and
And
then
it
it
was
wasn't.
not.
it was not. Yes.
You can also find that in OTS Pack 19. Pain Painter super rare. Oh god.
Product, please.
I
Nice.
know. Anyways, Photon Shockwave. This again, this is probably in top 5 most impactful exclusives. Wind Up Rabbit, Evil Czar Dolka, Dark Smog, and probably the most impactful card of the whole format, Wind Up Zenmaines. That was, I think that might have been the most expensive card at the time. The most expensive, like competitively relevant card was Wind Up Zenmaines. It was like around $100, I believe, at the time, right? Am I remembering that wrong?
It was the most generic one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was like a big selling point, right? Because if you pulled one rabbit, you needed multiple like copies. If you pulled a Zenmaines, it could go into your generic.
Literally any deck. Yeah. Tour guide into anything summons Zenmaines. Yes.
You know what I mean? You could play like a budget alternative, and it was like pretty reasonable into the format. Yeah, and we went over Dark Smog and everything else, right?
Yeah, Dark Smog, Dolka definitely made the Down Rabbit deck a lot stronger. Wind Up Rabbit definitely helping wind ups, of course.
Like, that's a very good card, I think. Photon Saber Tiger at the time.
Yeah, yes, that one as well. Yeah, yep. 2012.
Order of Chaos.
Order of Chaos.
We got some good ones.
I thought there were more, honestly, but when I looked back at it, I think Wind Up Shark is just on another level. Like it really overshadows all the rest of them. But if you have more that you want to talk about, then go ahead. But
the only other card would be like Insector Hopper.
Insector Hopper,
but that's not even close.
Yeah, not even close to Wind Up Shark.
And inhibited the entire deck. So
yeah,
I think like White Dragon Ninja is like
enabled
kind of a card design, but obviously didn't really do anything.
Yeah, but that was a cool card. That was a cool card. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that made the Ninja deck even like 1% like a rogue deck in my opinion. Like they weren't not really even like a cohesive strategy without that card.
When Torbus came out and everyone thought the world was ending, but they didn't know why. They saw a card that
then
had
Torbus wasn't good. Yeah.
Yeah. Funny how it be.
Yeah. So Galactic Overlord.
This pretty bad.
This one has a card near and dear to my heart, Noble Knight Artorgus. This was which we'll go into. So this, despite being the only Noble Knight card printed at the time, would begin the trend of the Noble Knight archetype that I'll talk about. And the first ever really TCG exclusive archetype, which is one of my favorites as well. Tardy Orc. It wasn't relevant at all, but I thought it was funny. There was an article, it's probably still up on the blog, revealing this card. And they said they didn't like how the set with the set code Orcs had no Orc cards, so they printed Tardy Orc because he was late to Order of Chaos.
Yes.
And then that was what
I think Action is a card that like could have been good and then just wasn't. And then obviously Trial and Tribulation, then Hieratic Seal.
Hieratic Seal of the Ashes is another one I have. Yeah, Hieratic Seal of the Ashes saw a little bit of play down the line with Dragon Rulers, but it wasn't super crazy in my opinion.
Everyone realized these cards weren't very good.
Return of the Duelist. Again, another Noble Knight Gawain. This card actually saw play though. This was played in like a hero beat deck. Like because it could just summon itself from your hand if you controlled Alias. So which they also printed Heroic Champion Excalibur in this set, which was a good 2 warrior level, like rank 4. So that was like an actual card. Prophecy Destroyer and Spellbook Crescent. Spellbook Star Hall of the Spellbook Library of the Crescent, which would end up seeing play down the line.
Did Revival Golem end up seeing play?
Yes, Revival Golem. Yes, Revival Golem saw play in Adamantipator, I believe, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, because if it's sent to the graveyard, you can summon it. It's a rock monster.
And then Abyss Rising. This was the first. Oh, actually, Return of the Duelist also had a Noble Arms. So the first Noble Arms, it was Noble Arms.
Was it Gallatin?
Yes, Gallatin. Okay. That one wasn't great, but Abyss Rising. Spellbook Star Hall would see play later. Noble Arms Arfidator, as well as the ignoble Lonzelin, but Arfidator actually saw play in Goatee in 2018. It was one of the Isolde equipped people played because if you drew it, you could pop a back row with it, and then when you linked into your Sold, Noble Arms just says if it leaves the field and there's a Noble Knight, you can just equip it from your graveyard. So it would equip back to a Sold and pop another back row. So it actually just popped 2 back row if you drew it. So it was one of the Noble Arms or one of the equip spells that they played. Huh?
And looking at Abyss Dweller on my screen.
Yes.
I feel like we haven't talked
Abyss
about
Dweller. Abyss Dweller was the big one from Abyss Rising. Which Abyss Dweller being an exclusive is crazy. Also, that card is so absurd, but that'll
See, man.
Yeah.
Since the beginning.
Yep. And then moving into 2013, Cosmo Blazer. This was the first big push for Noble Knights, specifically Noble Knight Medrot, which was like the first like actual payoff card for that deck. And then their rank 4 Noble Knight Artorgus. And then Mermail Abystius was the big TCG exclusive. I was kind of surprised Fire Fist didn't get a good one. It was like a really bad, no, that was not even till the next set. But Fire Fist never got really like a crazy TCG exclusive in this era. They were like always just pretty middling. Abystius, obviously ridiculous Mermail card. Like kind of like the heart and soul of the deck moving forward.
I feel like the reason why that didn't happen is because like Yu-Gi-Oh was based on a lot of like, oh, this one card is just generating so much, and Mermail was like kind of expensive in that sense. So like giving them something like Tias where it's just like one card, discard, float, like do a bunch. Obviously, like it in hindsight, it was a terrible decision. For like the years it was good, but you know that was probably like what they were for. It's like, yeah, they need another bone. It's like, yeah. Okay.
And then Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy. This was an incredibly powerful set, and the TCG exclusives did not really come close to just the main core set. This was the set that introduced Spellbook of Judgment as well as the Dragon Rulers. But notable exclusives, there was the second like a big wave of Noble Knight support, not super relevant. And then Totem Bird, which saw play down the line in a number of different, mainly off the back of Speedroid Terratop, but definitely relevant.
Yeah, it was that and the
Ultra
like
Tops.
Magispector.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
Like Magispector played that.
Judgment of the Light, the last set of 2013, Xyz Encore, and Galaxy Serpent, in my opinion, are the notable ones that I've seen any play. Not nearly as good as the previous couple ones, but you know, definitely notable. And then this is kind of when we see a shift away. So this is so now we're in 2014 or 2013. From here to the end, there
was one other one I want to talk about.
What was it?
Real
Sure.
quick. It was Cockadoodle-Doo.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah. Cockadoodle-Doo. But
I think I saw some play as well, but like it was very, very like remote in that one pocket of the Dragon Ruler format where people were making synchros.
Yeah.
But,
So from here on out, the design philosophy of premieres, it seemed, kind of shifted away from these generic power cards. There were still a couple sprinkled in here and there, but it was mostly onto archetypes. So Shadow Specters had a huge push for Noble Knights. The first ones I have in parentheses good Noble Knights, and by good I mean even remotely playable, which was Noble Knight Boars, Lady of the Lake, Excalibur, the rank 5, the Synchro, just like, you know, they had a big push where they wanted Noble Knights to be like a cohesive deck, and in my opinion, it probably was sort of for the first time.
Yeah, I could go to my local and I could win my local with.
Yeah, with it, yes. Which previously you could not even win your locals with Noble Knights, but now you could. Now it was like a functional deck. And then Legacy of the Valiant, again, mostly just the Noble Knight support cards. The notable one being Guinevere, Queen of Noble Arms, and then Obedience Schooled.
Paladin Zectron.
Paladin Zectron. Yeah. That was in Legacy of the Valiant, or was that in Judgment of the Light?
Paladin Zectron was level.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
And then 2014 Primal Origin. This one had the final push for Noble Knights for quite some time. We would eventually see more way down the line, 4 years later. And then it had Escalation of the Monarchs, not notable at the time, but would be eventually. Sylvan Princess Sprout and Artifact Scythe.
Yeah.
Incredible, right? Just absolutely incredible. Artifact Scythe world premiere, because
I was like, reasonable one.
At the time it was okay. At the time it was reasonable. I agree. But so this is where we can probably do. So now we're at Duelist Alliance 2014. I think from here to literally modern day will take 5 minutes. Burning Abyss in Duelist Alliance, Dante, Graf, Skarm, Seer, and Traveler, and then for the next 4 sets, the only notable exclusives literally were the Burning Abyss cards, and then New Challengers had Fusion Substitute, Secrets of Eternity had Mischief of the Gnomes, and Cross Souls had Moon Mirror Shield. Again, not anything crazy, but just Burning Abyss. Arguably the best deck for literally a whole year. It was never worse than the second best deck of the format for a full year. It was either the best deck or the second best deck at every point from Duelist Alliance through Cross Souls.
It's crazy. It just ate up all of those slots, dude. That's so funny.
Yeah. Yep. And literally had 4 cards every. And then there was also UA, but that doesn't matter like at all actually. And then when Burning Abyss was done, Clash of Rebellion introduced Cosmo. Also, you know, a top 3, top 4 deck for the full year. It was getting support, and then also Kaijus. Kaijus were world premieres. So, I believe the best one being in Dimension of Chaos, Gamma Seal, or at least the most played one. But quite literally, I do not have any notable exclusives in Dimension of Chaos or Shining Victory other than Cosmo. And then Breakers of Shadow, which had more Cosmo, also had Ultimate Providence as the only notable exclusive I have here. Then moving on from Cosmo, the Dark Illusion introduced, it phased out Kaiju and Cosmo and introduced 2 more archetypes, Spiral and Subterror. One of them, Subterror, being definitely one of the archetypes of all time. Spiral being one of the best archetypes of all time. So a little bit of a discrepancy of quality there. At the time, obviously, Spiral was nothing crazy. It wouldn't be for a little over a year later that it would really get the support it needed. But Invasion Vengeance had Vermilion Dragon Mech. I think Vermilion Dragon Mech is the perfect power level for what a world premiere card should be, in my opinion. I think that is one of the best design cards ever. Actually,
like, it was literally, it came out at the correct time.
Mm-hmm.
It did enough. And I just think, like, you know, you don't see cards like that being released. You know, I feel like they're either too far behind or so far ahead where they don't see play for a couple of years. Like, that card came in the right time.
Yes.
Like,
I
the
think
level of Tornado
literal
Dragon,
chef's kiss.
that's
Vermilion Dragon Mech, brilliantly designed card in my opinion. Also second wave of Spiral, including Spiral Master Plan and Spiral Resort. 2 very insane cards. Raging Tempest, very, very controversial one here. Sea Monster of Theseus was touted as going to be the card of 2017 by the preview articles. You know, like best card ever, ha ha ha. What the people didn't know is Raging Tempest did contain the best card ever printed, Spiral Tough.
Yep.
That is what they didn't want. That's what they didn't want you to find out. It did contain the best card. Maximum Crisis 2017. Also, again, I think this one a little bit too good. Tornado Dragon. I think kind of in the same vein as Vermilion Dragon Mech, but I think Tornado Dragon was maybe a little bit. I mean, it was better, but I think its power level was a little bit higher than I would have liked, maybe, as you know. But definitely very, very strong card. And then the final wave of Spiral and Subterror for a while, including Spiral Sleeper and Subterror Fiendus. So that would be, you know, the backbone of both of those decks when they got their next support a little bit later. Code of the Duelist, Circuit Break, Extreme Force, and Flames of Destruction all had exclusively Vendread and FA, which, in my opinion, there were no other notable exclusives. I even think there might not have been any in some of these sets. Like, I remember Vendread. Yeah.
No idea.
I don't believe there were any cards other than these archetypal. I don't think there were any generic cards. I remember after the bangers of Noble Knights, one of my favorite decks to play like casually. Burning Abyss, very strong deck that saw a lot of competitive success. Cosmo, another very strong deck that saw competitive success. And then Spiral, a deck that hadn't hit it off yet, but was definitely had the makings of a good deck, and then one set later would get its final card to make it literally the best deck the game had ever seen up until that point. I think I was very excited for Vendread, and I believe you were too, Jeff. Or am I making that up? Did you?
Yeah, no, yeah, I really was. That like it had as far as like ritual decks go, it had like a lot going for it, being able not only to like utilize zombie cards, but the fact that most of them just kind of floated into more ritual cards.
Yeah.
The only problem with it obviously is that it had no end goal because it didn't really have any way to like interrupt with the opponent. It was just a lot of floating and searching.
Yeah. And then it just kind of got more support and more support and more support and just was never good, in my opinion. Same with FA. FA did eventually get one good card, the level 7 Synchro that saw play here and there sprinkled in. But 2018, Cybernetic Horizon, Dangers. And Noble Knights, randomly. New Noble Knights that, in my opinion, should have been released 4 years earlier. The Noble Knight cards in Cybernetic Horizon would have been above average cards in 2014 Nats format and were unplayable by 2018 standards. So that was unfortunate because I really do like Noble Knights a lot.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is this the first transition we have from more than 10?
No, that was Flames. I had in my notes. It was either Extreme Force or Flames of Destruction.
Okay.
I believe Extreme Force transitioned to 12. Extreme Force transitioned, I believe, to 12 world premieres and 8 imports instead of 10 world premieres and 10 imports.
Yeah, I feel like there was a point where they had to sort of spread out.
It was
imports, right?
It was
there was like, what else were they gonna put?
They were running out of import cards. Yeah, so because if you, I don't think you can track it historically, but you can like Google like cards OCG has that TCG doesn't, and there are people that have lists.
Like a thread on like every forum that someone would update religiously. It's like this card isn't out yet.
And if you check it now, there are very, very, very few cards on that list.
For that Royd card, unless it already came out.
No, Shadow Royd did not come out.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they were doing more premieres and less imports simply because they were running out of imports. Like the list just got small, and if they kept doing 10, they would just run out really quickly, I guess. So. Dangers and Noble Knights, and then Soul Fusion also had more Dangers and Noble Knights, and Dangers ended up borderline ruining the game that they, instead of going for a full year of Dangers, they literally phased them out after 2 sets. Dark Neostorm, I believe, had 1, and then they just didn't get more, but or maybe Savage Strike had 1. It had Ogopogo, I think. Maybe that was Dark Neostorm, I don't really remember, but
I think it was Dark Neostorm.
Yeah.
Actually, it might not have been.
Who knows? I should have written it down, but I didn't. Savage Strike introduced the Time Thief exclusives, notably Redoer. And then 2019 had Spellbound, No Material. And
Ogopogo was the sneak peek promo.
For what? For Savage Strike or Dark Neostorm?
No, it was just the Ultra. Never mind.
No, it was a sneak peek promo.
000.
It was a sneak peek promo, yeah. It was.
Crazy.
But 2019... maybe it wasn't. Literally, who knows? I don't know.
I don't think that card was a sneak peek.
Me either, but it was 000. Yeah, but it wasn't a sneak promo.
000, right?
Yeah, but it was not the sneak peek promo. They changed it or something. I don't know, but doesn't matter.
Token Collector was sneak peek promo for Soul Fusion.
It was. You're right. Yes.
Yeah. Because no Material 000, another exclusive.
Also not.
So
yes.
The exclusives go from 000 and everything else.
Yes. So. Yeah, because they stopped. Well, exclusives were always 00. I think. I don't remember. It doesn't matter. But yeah, no Material in Dark Neostorm and more Time Thieves. Rising Rampage actually shockingly had a couple notable ones. Dream Mirror was the archetype, which I think Jeff and I have talked personally about how much we don't like this deck because this was so. I took a break from Yu-Gi-Oh! For about a year, pretty much starting at this point. So when I used to read literally every single card that would come out, I didn't read Dream Mirrors just because I wasn't playing at the time. This is the only break literally since 2006 I think I took from the game. So I just wasn't really keeping up with like cards like that. And then Cap Shell, which might be relevant soon in like Sprite or Runic or whatever. Barricade Board Blocker, very relevant card for a while, and the Doom Eagle, the Link 3 that Tri Brigade played.
Yeah,
all exclusives from Rising Rampage. Very cool stuff. I love the Doom Eagle. I think he's awesome.
A very well designed card.
Yes,
really just needed to be opened up with the Tri Brigade cards.
Yep. And then 2019 Chaos Impact had Desert Locusts and more Dream Mirrors and nothing else. And then Ignition Assault and Tourneycode had the Plunder Patrols that weren't really great, but eventually got maybe the more support they needed and more support coming out in Photon Hypernova that will maybe make them better. And then Rise of the Duelist is the only set ever since 2007's Strike of Neos that does not have any world premiere cards.
Wait,
it had 20 imports. Yes. It had 0 world premiere cards in Rise of the Duelist. It is
It's
the
very
only
funny
set.
to think
And,
about.
and Ryan talked about this. Ryan and I talked about this yesterday, but we are pretty sure that this is because that this set came out during
The lockdown.
basically
Yeah.
the
Just
lockdown
Yeah.
and height of COVID. So
yeah.
no one was in the office. Probably this work couldn't get done on this stuff efficiently. So to make things easier, they just put all of the imports in, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably. That's I mean, that's our guess, yeah. And then interestingly that I never considered, Phantom Rage has double the amount of slots that an archetype usually gets. It's the mutant archetype, and I believe they got 12. Maybe 6 of them were supposed to be in Rise of the Duelist.
Potentially,
I
right?
never thought
That's
about
very
that
possible.
previously. That's maybe the mutants were supposed to be broken up between Rise of Duelist and Phantom Rage, but because of there were none in Rise of Duelist, they just put all of them in Phantom Rage. I never thought about that previously because that would follow the trend of 2 sets of Time Thieves starting in 2019, and then 2 sets of Dream Mirror, then 2 sets of Plunder Patrol. Then it would have been 2 sets of Mutant. Then Blazing Vortex and Light and Landing Overdrive had 2 sets of War Rock. Dawn of Majesty and Burst of Destiny had 2 sets of P Trooper. Battles of Chaos and Dimension Force, 2 sets of Libromancer. And then Power of the Elements and Darkwing Blast, 2 sets of Goatee, as we talked about at the beginning, all bringing this entire thing full circle. Last notable one is Power of the Elements also had Garura, which again, I think maybe slightly overtuned, maybe a little bit too good. It sounds crazy to say that card is maybe too good, but I think it is.
It's a card when you read, you're like, oh, okay. In the context of like what you know exists, like, oh yeah, this card is good. But as time goes on, you're like, wow, this card does a lot.
That card, yeah.
Yeah.
I think like in the context of True
Yeah,
Element, the
like
fact that you can just summon it in True Element is like crazy. But like Super Poly, it works with the Nidir Servant. Yeah, it just does a lot. Maybe a little bit too good. Maybe didn't need to have the draw effect when sent directly from the extra deck. Who knows? But obviously not game breaking, but just in my opinion, maybe a little bit stronger than it had to be. But definitely a strong card, and very worthy, I think, to continue the legacy, I guess, of these cards that we just spent, the last 40 minutes discussing. So there you have it. That is I'm not going to say comprehensive history of world premieres because we did not go through obviously every single card ever, but we did go through every single set. So, and I could be wrong about this, but after some brief research, I don't think there's a video on this topic from any of the really big content creators for Yu-Gi-Oh. So,
There's someone else say
actually, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe, but like,
That's tradition.
yeah.
That
So,
means they sat through the whole thing. So by all means,
yeah.
continue.
So we
Keep listening.
might have had the first word on the topic, more or less, in this manner.
Alright.
So
Now that we've gone through everything,
mhm.
do you prefer them making archetypes or do you
No.
prefer them making generic good cards?
I do not prefer them making archetypes. I prefer them making. I understand it's not possible for every set to have 12 Vermilion Dragon mech quality cards. I understand that's not possible. But
And then you also don't want the ignorant cards.
and then I also don't want 12 maxis in every set. Yeah. But I
So
do.
when you
So I am the opposite, where
Really?
I prefer archetypes simply because, so this is kind of like a weird question because I prefer when they were like Cosmo level, right?
Yes.
Not unplayable.
BA
So we're
level
talking about
too strong.
right. Even like BA level, like BA was very very strong, but I don't think BA ever felt oppressive.
I agree with that actually. Yeah, I agree with that. And it's weird because Cosmo sometimes did feel oppressive, even though I think it was weaker in the context, which is interesting.
So I prefer medium to stronger archetypes, but that's because one of my favorite things is that when we get things that Japan doesn't and no one knows what to do with them.
That's true.
Uh,
Yeah.
When otherwise people can just look to what's been happening in Japan for the last 3 to 6 months, start building their decks, and like everything is kind of solved. So when we get these new archetypes or lots of different powerful cards all at once, that changes things up and makes it so people actually have to think a lot more. I love that. So that's why I prefer that to just like, oh, here's like a couple like good generic cards.
Maybe I just haven't felt that way, and so because like the last time that happened was Dangers, and they were just too good. like
Yes.
to
I
the
can't
like
believe
the
we
to
ruined the
like
game with danger cards
to
on
like
it.
the unfun level of too good.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Of like where, and then we got after that it was like time thieves that were like cool, but they didn't get enough support to be like an actual deck. And I think that's I think actually that's the problem I have now is that the decks only get 2 waves of support and they just feel incomplete in my opinion. Like I think Mutant the cards were very interesting and I would have loved to see more, and then they did not get any more, and then Japan just made 1 Mutant card that actually did a lot for the deck but not enough. Like it needed more than that, and it's just like that's what kind of leaves a sour taste in my mouth, I think, is when we have stuff like Dream Mirror where I'm reading these and I'm like, what is going on? And then they just stop making more and I go like, what was the point of this?
Yeah.
You know?
What if from that perspective, right? What if TCG like TCG sets had maybe 1 or 2 exclusives that were meant to buff maybe some of the more like underrepresented archetypes that are coming out from OCG?
That's what they
What if
used
that
to
was
do.
just
And I
yeah,
kind of liked
that's what I
that.
mean. Like, why wouldn't that just be like the case now? Like, I feel like
Yeah.
that would definitely help quite a lot. I don't know to what extent or like how you would. I don't even know what any of these new OCG archetypes are, to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
I just sit here. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that's
like
true.
they're either too good or they're just so irrelevant that it just doesn't matter. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any perfect solution, but like I do agree that you know, we after tracking the history, we can see they've taken a lot of different approaches. And let's get some viewer engagement. Tell us in the comments which you prefer. Did you prefer just the generic power cards in like the super early era, 2007 to 2009? Did you prefer the sort of 1 or 2 off power cards with some like archetypal support sprinkled in, which we saw for, you know, the better part of like 2010 to 2014? Or do you prefer it now when they're just entire archetypes and the power cards are kind of sprinkled in very few and far between, and it's mostly focused on new archetypes?
Or are you an OCG purist?
Yeah, or do you just hate that we get English cards before or do you hate new cards? You know, that's a valid opinion, I guess. Also, I don't know,
Hey,
but
fun fact: TCG exclusives still have to be approved by Japan.
yeah, probably, yeah.
Well, I mean, if everything has to be approved by Japan,
I would
basically.
imagine, yeah.
But really, TCG exclusive.
I mean,
just,
the reason that I know that has to be true is the Noble Knight Xyz monsters have like different arts in Japan, even though they came out here first. So they must have been designed there, and or you know, like the artwork at least, you know, because there's no way they would change the art. Like what you know what I mean? Like that one must have been drawn first, I guess. You know. So when we get the lost art for Sacred Noble Knight of King Artorigus, I will be the first in line. But we'll see. This went a little longer than our first episode, but I do want to thank everyone for joining us for our second episode on the world premiere, Spellbound, Karma Cannon, and all that good stuff.
Ryan's Noble Knight episode.
Yeah, yeah. I also got a new microphone. I was gonna just say that at the beginning, but I think obviously you probably could tell that I'm not crackling.
And a new keyboard. But,
yeah, and a new keyboard. We're not gonna talk about that. I spilled a bang on my keyboard last night, but that doesn't matter. Yeah, so if you guys enjoyed this, you know, just let us know. We are just starting out, so I'm hopefully not going to ask you to like, comment, subscribe every single one, but I am kind of curious to hear opinions on these as we were just kind of formulating. Do you like the longer format? Do you think this is maybe a little bit too long? I understand it could be a lot for someone to sit through in one sitting, so, you know, break it up or whatever. And what topics would you like to hear covered? I have a couple more ideas, at least for the next few.
Stuff too.
Yeah.
For the people that are subscribed to Duelist Academy, we are looking at maybe doing a Patreon exclusive where we'll maybe have some like you know, some Q&A sort of stuff in the Discord server if you haven't already joined. It is free to join now, I believe, right?
It is, yes.
The whole thing now.
Yes.
Yes, you know, be able to join. Obviously, we would look at releasing the episode for the Patreon subscribers first, as you know, want to get back to them. And then we'll release it, you know, shortly after. So if you did ask some questions, you will be able to get some answers. But again, supporting us, supporting, you know, what we're doing, that's always appreciated. But you don't always have to do that. So we will give you 3 episodes a month, but we are looking to, you know, get back to the Patreon subscribers too.
Yeah. So I think that wraps it up. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully we will see you next week.
Adios.
Yeah.